Today we're going to talk about a character from regular show who I believe many people, including myself, underestimated for a long time in the show. But in the end, he ended up surprising everyone in an epic and crazy way, showing that he was much more than just the typical park intern. By now, you probably know I'm talking about Thomas or Nikolai. I'll call him Thomas throughout this video because I'm much more used to that name for the character, even though it's not his real name. Up to a certain point in regular show, Thomas was practically the same as High Five Ghost in terms of character development, extremely shallow and very underutilized. But he ended up standing out a lot at the very end because of the amount of surprising information we discovered about him. Personally, I find the episodes focused on him amazing and very interesting. Let's be real, considering regular show's crazy nature, Thomas being a secret agent from another country isn't that shocking. But even so, it never crossed my mind. For a long time, Thomas seemed extremely dull and pointless in the show. However, he was far from being a hated character since he never did anything to harm anyone and always seemed like a nice, even somewhat naive guy. But even being this nice guy, he was also far from being a lovable character, at least to me, simply because he had no charisma, personality, or anything interesting about him. I think this was because he was the most normal person in the show, which shouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but surrounded by the other regular show characters, he ended up giving off a sense of boredom, if you know what I mean. Most of the time, he would appear briefly in episodes and was just there. He rarely participated and always seemed to prefer avoiding conflicts, which was smart on his part. But for being such a nice guy, he ended up suffering a lot at the hands of Muscle Man. And without a doubt, those were the moments when I hated Muscle Man the most because he acted like a jerk, bullying and taking advantage of someone who didn't deserve it. And honestly, no one does. Thomas basically just wanted to do his job and not get involved in the crazy situations the park crew would get into. And of course, there were moments when he helped, but most of the time, that's how it was. However, if there's one episode that was a great hint that there was something more about Thomas and that he wasn't what he seemed, it was the episode Thomas Fights Back. The level of intelligence, effort, and capability he shows in this episode just to avoid being fired by Benson is almost scary. It also becomes clear that he had excellent hand-to-hand combat skills when he immobilizes Muscle Man in seconds with impressive ease. In this episode, Thomas was a one-man army. He practically took down the rival park by himself, with every part of his plan working perfectly. And as a bonus, he completely outsmarted Gene, showing that he had no trouble pretending to be someone he wasn't. In fact, Thomas made it clear that he was great at it. I was genuinely surprised and impressed by his character in this episode. Besides earning the respect and trust of the park crew at that moment, I also started to see Thomas differently after that. It was kind of inevitable since I now realized he wasn't as innocent and harmless as he had seemed all this time. Later, we discover why he was so intelligent, calculating, and skilled in combat, and everything starts to make sense. His true identity is revealed in the episode The Real Thomas, where we learn that all that time in the park, Nikolai was just acting and pretending to be a naive guy. In reality, he was a spy from East Pines on a mission to steal the US park and destroy Washington. This episode delivers a huge, crazy, and absolutely amazing plot twist that no one expected. I was blown away when they showed all the flashbacks of Thomas carrying out sabotage tasks and hiding who he really was. The truth was always there, right under our noses. Moments that seemed completely normal where Thomas was just acting like himself. But maybe if those moments had lasted just a second longer, Nikolai would have been exposed. It's insane how those seemingly innocent moments from past episodes actually hid so much. Thinking back, you realize how masterfully he balanced his behavior, acting nice enough to be seen as a good guy and earn everyone's trust, but not so nice that he would draw too much attention to himself. This allowed him to be an invisible employee, so to speak, someone who could go unnoticed by everyone who didn't see him as important. That way, he had the freedom to quietly carry out his missions right under everyone's noses. After all, no one really paid attention to what Thomas was doing, which always gave him the upper hand. I think it's simply brilliant and so cool how much depth and development they managed to give to a character who was previously boring. Doing this in just 2 episodes that completely changed how the audience saw him. In the end, the bond of friendship that Nikolai built with the park crew became so strong and real for him that he chose to betray his own country rather than betray the people who had become important to him. It's really great that the creator didn't leave Thomas as a villain in the end, but instead gave him the chance to redeem himself in such an epic way. In the episode where he appears appears for the last time to hang out with the park crew and say his final goodbye. I realized that by that point, he had become a lovable character in the show. Whether he was Nikolai or Thomas, the guy was incredible. He sacrificed so much just to avoid hurting the people who cared about him, and proved he had a good heart when he had to make a very difficult choice.